Welcome again to the S.E.M podcast. I'm your host tonight, Zach Hewlett, and I have a guest host with us, Zach Lovell. Today we're joined by our good friend, Steve Gardner. Steve, how are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
I'm good.
What part of the world are you calling from tonight?
Well, I am in Kaysville, Utah right now.
All right, Kaysville. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, we talked briefly as we started. Steve said he's listened to the podcast, but just a reminder, we'll talk pre-mission and your reaction going to Scotland. Then we'll jump over the mission, talk about life since you've been home, and then we'll go back through Scotland and reminisce. So I'll turn the time to you, Steve.
Sounds good. So I guess for me, I'm kind of the usual story. Like a lot of people, I always wanted to serve. It was never really a question of if, but when. I grew up with really good parents. And I remember my dad, he served in Taiwan, and he had a visiting general authority come. I want to say it was apostle, but he didn't really remember. But he said when you're called on a mission, you're called for 2 years to serve, but you're really called to the people for eternity. And,
wow.
And that always kind of stuck with me. And I feel like that's really true for a lot of us that served in Scotland. We feel like we're still part of the culture. We're still part of the environment. Even though we've been removed for like 20 years for some of us, which is crazy to think of. So I might call you guys by your last name, or maybe I'll call Zach Lovell because I still remember him that way. So
there you go.
I can differentiate between the two of you guys that have the same name, but
that is one conundrum we did not discuss before we started this.
Yeah, we'll work out the details on the way through for a lot of this, right?
For sure.
We were talking about how it's almost been longer that we've been off our missions than from when we were born to start in our missions. Like, it's crazy how long it's been, but it feels like it's just been a blink of an eye for me.
Yeah, so, I agree. For me, I just turned 38, and to think that 19 years ago I went on a mission is pretty crazy. So
yeah, I'm pushing 36 now. I'll be 36 in January. I think Elder Lovell's birthday is in January too, right?
Yeah, it's 2 days after your birthday. Yeah. I'll be 35.
Nice.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, but yeah, so I always want to serve. So my senior year of high school was kind of crazy, though. So I lived in North Carolina. I kind of claim that I grew up there. I lived in 5 states now, but most of my impressionable years, I'll say, were in North Carolina. So right before my senior year of high school, I moved to Utah. I lived with my one set of grandparents, my other set of grandparents, in a rental house. Like, I lived all over trying to get through high school. And so when it came time to go to college, I ended up going to BYU, which I appreciate your sweatshirt again for that. I'll join Zach on our level on that side. So this kind of gets more into getting my call. And so my parents at this point had bought a house in South Jordan, and they still live there now. So I did all my papers, all that stuff through South Jordan, through my state president there. And it was really interesting because BYU, it was kind of like the Wild West when it comes to mission calls. I lived on the freshman dorms, and I want to say there was like 50 rooms, 2 guys per room. And there's, 3 floors, 2 wings. There's like 1,000 guys, give or take, that are all 19. And back then you couldn't serve at 18. So all of us are freshmen getting ready to get our call. And we're all putting our papers. And like every Wednesday was crazy because you get, 10 guys that would get their mission calls.
Oh, man.
You just go down to we had those like communal areas, whatever you want to call them. And there'd be tons of people that were down there just opening their calls. And it was crazy. It was actually really fun because we learned a lot kind of about how the church worked. We found out that if you had a postage below $1, it meant you were staying in the States. And if you were above $1, you're going out of the States. And so,
wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And we also found that they kind of called missionaries in groups. And so I was excited because the week before I got my call, there was 4 guys on my floor that got called to Germany, and I always wanted to go there. So I was pretty much expecting like Munich or Frankfurt or something like that, because that's where they were going. But so yeah, sorry, I took notes. I'm gonna glance down my notes every once in a while.
You're fine.
But so I don't know if I should share this or not because it's not really my story, but I'll try anyway. But about 2 weeks before I got my call, there was a guy, and he was down, opening his calls, and I was just hanging out. And there was like 5 or 6 of them, trying to remember. And the first one get called to like Tahiti or something. The next guy goes to France, like these cool places. And the last guy gets called to Boise, Idaho. And this that kind of stereotypical thing. And I felt so bad because he just ripped up his call right then, threw it in the trash. He's like, I'm not going.
Oh
I
man.
was like, oh, yeah. And that was my reaction too. I was like, oh man, you don't really get to choose where you get to go, right? But you're always told that you're called where you're needed. And I just felt horrible for that guy. And as far as I know, he didn't go. And I still to this day, I remember him. I remember his face, and it's feel really bad. So sorry.
That would be hard. That would be a hard thing
be.
to swallow, especially when you're seeing everybody else that's, touting places all over the world. And then you can drive 4 hours to get there or whatever from Provo. I mean, it's a different story altogether.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then it's the joke, right? Everybody's like, well, at least in the States.
Right.
Like, you're going to go to Boise, or you're going to go to Provo, right?
That's right.
Or California.
Yeah. And so I felt so bad for this kid. So going to my call, like a week or two later, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm nervous that I would get called like that. And I was also really nervous about learning a language. I don't know why. I put on they gave you those 2 boxes that I'm sure don't mean anything, of I want to leave the country and I want to learn a language. Because that was another thing we looked at, is we knew so many people, or so many guys on my floor, like, I don't want to learn a language. I don't want to leave the country. And those are the ones that left and learned a language, and vice versa. And so it was really interesting to see that. But so when my call finally came, I was sitting in a biology class, and my roommate, who's going to drift in and out of the story, is an awesome guy named Nick Carter. He was with me at the time, and I get a call from my mom, and I'm trying to remember, but she basically said it's here. And so I said, all right, well, what's the postage? And she said it was $1.09. And so I knew I was sick early this week, so I'm pretty messed up right now. But I knew I was leaving the country. And so I just looked back into the classroom and tell my roommate, it's like, hey, I got it, I'm out. He's like, well, I'm coming with you. Because I told him it was $1.09. I think I texted him or something. I don't remember how it worked out, but either way, we get out and we just start driving to my parents' house. I tell my mom I'm on the way. And we showed up there maybe like half hour, 45 minutes later. And she had got my grandparents, and my younger 2 brothers were there. My older brother was serving a mission. I still feel pretty bad about this, but my dad was actually on a business trip. I probably should have waited for him to get home, but I was just so excited. So yeah. Well, and
He'll
when
forgive
he
you.
opened his call, he did it by himself in his dorm room, and so I don't feel too bad. So
There you go. Yep.
my dad's great. I love my dad. So I don't know if he'll watch this or not, but if you do, I'm still sorry about that, Dad. But yeah, and I start opening it, start reading the call, and it's Scotland, Edinburgh, right? Like everybody says.
Mhm.
And my grandma just starts losing it. And so come to find out, she'd been praying her whole life that one of my kingdom, because she was first generation immigrant. Her mom was from Carlisle, and so she wanted somebody to go back.
Wow.
And find the family and all that stuff, which obviously our mission didn't go that far south, but she was excited that someone was at least close. And so she was losing it. My mom was really excited because Scotland was safe. My older brother was serving in South Chicago at that time, which of course is a really rough area in the States. So I mean, we talk about Glasgow in our area, and it was rough, don't get me wrong, but South Chicago, we toured my brother's mission later, and yeah, we did not get out of the car. We locked the doors and just
not a place you want to do that. Goodness.
Yeah. And so that was pretty fun. And then I got to the back page, where they have the biography of the mission president, and I started reading that. And the only way I can really describe it is, the scene in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where the grandpa jumps out of the bed and he's all excited because Charlie found the golden ticket. My grandpa did that because he had worked with President Frederick for years. And so they had been good friends for years. And so there was like all these connections and all that fun stuff. So, so that was really fun. And then another small note, this is kind of drift in and out too, but my grandpa had a friend, he still has a friend, who's Ben Banks. I don't know if you guys have met Ben Banks at the mission reunions or not.
But
I met him, yeah.
Name sounds familiar to me, though.
Yeah, so he's
He used to be at 70.
president. Yeah, he's an emeritus now. Like, he's got a cool story, but he was the mission president for 2 years, because he got called to be in Area 70. I think I tried to call him today, but I couldn't get a hold of him. I was going to confirm some of the stuff, but in like the Philippines, I think is where he ultimately ended up going. And then, yeah, he was first quorum of the 70, presidency of 70, temple president in Jordan River.
Temple Solar too.
What was that?
And Temple Solar too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, he did my sealing to my wife. And then the coolest calling I've ever heard of is he was the ambassador to the church, which I didn't even know was a thing. But basically the calling is, if there's dignitaries that come to Temple Square, he would entertain them. And then he would take them to meet with like the first presidency and quorum of the 12. Like, just such a cool guy. But yeah, he's tied to Scotland too. So
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So timeline wise, when did you enter the MTC?
So I went, it was July 18th of 07.
July 07.
And Steve went to the MTC the year apart from each other.
Oh, okay. And so you got home July of 09, is that right, Steve?
Yeah. So, I mean, the timeline's a little weird, but it was June 30th is the day we left. I don't think I got released to July, but roughly that 2-year gap, right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's cool. Well, take us to that point in time. Take us to July of 2009. What have you been up to since then?
All right. So I've heard some of the podcasts, and I think the approach is somewhat no holds bar, scorched earth. So I'm going to keep that going with this. So I'm going to jump into the mission a little bit because it all tied together. But my first Christmas, I was in Dundee, and Dave Harrison, golfer Harrison, and I were, he was the district leader then. But I played golf all through high school, and Dave is known through the mission for being a golfer. And so somehow, I don't remember the details of it, but we ended up on a golf course in Cooper in the freezing cold with Elder Blake and Elder Lee. Sorry, I'll try and use first names, but it's habit now.
No, you're good.
But yeah, so basically we had this like grudge match between who's the better golfer. And he'd been out a year before me, so he hadn't played for a year. So credit to him there. But I remember we played 3 holes before we gave up because it was so cold, and I beat him by 1 stroke. So if he listens to this, and I'll send it to him, he needs to come defend himself. But that's my recollection of what happens. So luckily, Dave is such a nice guy. He doesn't hold any grudges. He's not competitive at all. So now going forward 18 months, I'm home for a couple days. I don't know how he gets my number, but he calls me out of the blue and says, "Hey, I got a tee time. We got a score to settle. I want you to meet me in Bountiful. Bring your clubs. We're going to figure this out." And so we go, and at this point, Dave is like the pro or assistant pro at Valley View. Like, his game is super polished, and he just wipes the floor with me. And so, but luckily, he's such a nice guy. Because he, until a couple of weeks ago, moved away, but he lives like less than a quarter mile from my house right now. So I see him quite often. And so Dave and I have been great friends since that day, and we still play golf together every once in a while.
Cool.
So, but about 2 weeks after that, Dave and I have been hanging out a lot. He calls me and he's like, "Hey, Dave was married to this girl named Steph at this time." He says, "Steph had this friend, Stacy. You should get to know her." And I remember when I took this call because I was pulling into my parents' house in South Jordan, and he was telling me about this. And being a return missionary, especially recently returned missionary in Utah, it's such a weird scenario because it seems like everybody has a daughter or a cousin or a niece that wants to, go on a first date. And it was just such a weird environment. And for some reason, when Dave called and said, "Hey, you need to meet this girl," I just had this distinct impression, I definitely need to know this girl. This could be the one and stuff. And the best part of the story, and I told my wife this like maybe an hour ago, and she has no recollection, because that's obviously not something you're going to bring up on a first date.
Right.
Well, like, I want to say it was like 2-3 years after we're married, I tell my wife this story. It's like, I just want you to know, when I first got the call from Dave, I knew there was something special. I needed to see this through, and that there was a good chance we ended up getting married. And she just looked at me, just straight face, and said, "Yeah, that never happened." All right. Sorry for wasting your time.
Oh man, that's funny.
Well, luckily, when I retold her today, she didn't remember that first story, and she at least believed me this time. So maybe she's getting more gullible. But
Or she just loves you unconditionally.
no, let's not go crazy. But
I love it.
yeah, so so she lived in Farmington. She went to BYU too. She had already graduated at that point. And so I was down in Provo. I went back there to BYU, and she was up here in Farmington, and we kind of did long distance for a little while. And then we ultimately ended up moving down there, and we got married and stuff. And so, yeah. And then she made me, I don't know if promise is the right word, but she made it very clear she wanted to stay in Utah. And so I did my best to keep that promise for when we were married. And about 9 months after we got married, we decided to move to Iowa for a decade. So I finished up at BYU, and through my my senior project, I got signed on with John Deere. And so halfway through that project, I got a job offer from them that it was too good to pass up. So then we moved out to Iowa, and I worked for them for about 10 years.
Nice.
And then now I work for Northrop Grumman. So they called me about 2.5 years ago. Kind of similar story of, we need people to work out here in Utah. What do you think? And I said, sure, let's do this thing. So
Nice.
that's how I ended up back here.
Very cool.
So yeah.
And kids?
So yeah, I have 2 kids. I have a 9-year-old named Sadie and a 5-year-old named Sammy.
Nice.
So, and my wife being Stacy, we've really leaned into that S thing.
Yeah.
So,
I love it.
yeah. So
Very
that's
cool.
fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, sounds like a fun story that took you halfway across the country, and I'm sure you enjoyed Iowa as much as anybody who can tell you about Iowa. I've heard great things about it. So Steve, take us now to the mission. You can start at the MTC, or you can just go straight into Scotland. It's up to you. I'll give you more time.
All right. So getting to the MTC, I think there's some things to note there. So my parents, I don't know why, but I was a nervous wreck when I was going to the MTC. I think a lot of us were. It's such a big life change and so much kind of pressure on the situation. But for some reason, they wanted me to drive the car there. And so at this time, my parents, they had this giant Buick that had this really long hood, like those old kind of LeSabres did. And I was used to driving an Altima because that's why I drove through high school and everything. And luckily, my mom doesn't hold this over me to this day. And I'm sure she'll watch this, and I don't know, she'll call me and yell at me for saying this. But when, they have those giant pillars at the Salt Lake Airport, I was parking and I didn't realize, so I actually rammed into one of those things because I wasn't paying attention. I was kind of nervous about what was going on.
Oh man.
Yeah, the car, everything, but yeah, she still she holds it over my head. And then to make matters worse, I have a brother that's like 15 years younger than me. So at that time he was like 4, maybe 5. And he was kind of running around. My parents had brought an extra suitcase for some reason, and he was climbing up as I was going through security. So kind of my last goodbye for 2 years. And all I see is him kind of stand up on the suitcase and it just fall, and he just busts up his nose. And so this drop off to the MTC, it's supposed to be this great experience. It's just all these bad memories of wrecking cars and breaking noses. And
that's rough.
Yeah. So luckily that was the worst of it. So then I got to the MTC, which was which is great. I really only remember two things from the MTC. And the first was that we loved to vandalize things when I was there. Did you guys do this where you like wrote your name on everything? And it was like a challenge to write your name on stuff?
Not everything,
Yeah.
but
On some things.
yeah, some things.
Yeah.
Our thing in my era was we discovered names on the back of the clocks, and so we found a clock that had no signatures on it, and we filled that thing up with our whole group. So
Oh, there you go.
that was it. Nothing that was apparent to anybody.
Yeah, so our stuff, it was kind of hidden too. I remember I wrote my name on the bottom of a bed. I kind of feel guilty about that now because I don't know why I did that. But yeah, I remember there was like a group of us that were like, I'm going to find the most obscure thing to write our name on. So I don't know why that sticks out for the MTC. And then I remember when we went and did the chapping day, I just remember thinking after that, like missionary work was way easier than I thought. Because I remember like the second door, which was like the first door, we ended up teaching some lady for like 45 minutes on our doorstep. And at the end of that, she called her neighbor over and she's like, hey, you got to hear this. And then we spent the rest of the time teaching the two of them together just out on the street. And I was like, wow, this whole missionary work thing is just so much easier than I thought, which is not foreshadowing at all to the next 2 years. Because it's definitely not that easy. But yeah, those are the two things. And my MTC group, we were pretty small, especially for a summer group. Like July, you'd figure it would be a big group, but
Yeah,
I can only remember, I looked through what journals I could find because a lot of my stuff is still in boxes because we've only lived in this house for like 9 months.
okay.
And I haven't gotten that far through the unpacking process to find all my mission stuff. But we had Landon Wells, Elder Hoffman, Elder Kofed, Elder Wonderly, and Sister Price are the ones I remember. And I did find these things. Do you have these, Zach?
Yes, I have. I don't have them. I don't have them anymore. I don't know what happened to them, but I remember those.
Yeah, but these are, if you don't have a copy, I'll send them to you guys. And Zach Hewlett, you're in this one, which is the 07. So I don't know how you squeaked in there, but.
Well, I went home January of 2007. So
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah,
I thought you
I
were for some reason.
no, I'm the baby of the two of us that do the hosting. So
Okay.
That's the old one.
that's right. That's right. Very cool. Yeah, I remember having those, and I used to always look over the missionaries and wonder, all right, who of these hooligans in this pamphlet are going to be one of my companions? Like that was one of the things that I used to think about a lot. And it's so interesting to see the pictures in a crappy printout and then see them in real life and be like, wow, you don't look anything like your picture. Like there was a couple of missionaries who'd lost a ton of weight and different things like that, that it was a little bit less futuristic, I guess, or showing off what they actually were until you actually met them in person, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think I looked through both of these and I didn't recognize myself, which probably says more about the past like 15 years than anything.
I love it. Nice.
Yeah,
Cool.
so then we took the train up, and I remember Elder Wells. He was such a great missionary from our group. We were, the rest of us, everybody, Elder Wells, we're all in the same car, but we were just so excited to be, out of the MTC and in a different country because I think Sister Price was English. Other than that, we were all from Utah or Idaho, I think. And so we just had like our foreheads glued to the glass. We're looking at all the scenery and all this British stuff. And then Elder Wells is just like running up and down the train, just talking to everybody he can about the gospel. And it just was interesting to see, like, he I remember that because it was just such a good example of, this isn't a time to be sightseeing. This is a time to, enjoy the 2 years, but get some work done. And it was, Elder Wells was a companion of mine later. So it was interesting to see the growth between both of us. And then we were actually roommates too. We became pretty good friends after that. So, but then, so we did make it to the mission home. We did Pratt's Hill, all that stuff. Pratt's Hill, it's such a cool thing because our mission's so unique in that way, right? That we literally climb a mountain. So, and I wonder if, when Scotland finally gets a temple, if they'll keep doing the Pratt's Hill or if they'll move to a temple. And I don't know. I kind of hope they keep Pratt's Hill, but
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when that day comes in the near
Depends
future.
on where they drop that temple. I keep hearing people tell me all sorts of things of where they think it's going to be, and I'm like, got a long way to get there. So carry on your wishing.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can find a way to get there. I haven't been back yet, but my wife and I have talked about if they ever get a temple, we want to be there for, the dedication or viewing or some of that process.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a mass incoming of former missionaries going to see that when that does happen. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. So then, all right. So into the companions and first area and stuff. So I was actually training a threesome. So I had 2 trainers, which was, I think, pretty unique. I don't know if too many other people have done that, but I think it's a great pattern, honestly, because it was really nice. I could see, 2 experienced missionaries playing off each other. I had Brady Cassidy, who I want to say was out like 14, 15 months. And then Ryan Gustafson, who was out like almost a year, really close to a year. And so it was good to see both of them. They had so much experience. But it was fun. It was also interesting because they were complete opposites of each other. And so that was fun because and one thing I should address, because I listened to Brady Cassidy's. I haven't talked to him since maybe a month or 2 after. I'd love to get back in contact with him, but he talked about the number prayer thing. Do you remember that from his at all?
Oh yeah, that was hilarious.
So I remember that. I didn't remember it until he said that, and I was listening to his podcast at work, and I just busted up laughing in the middle of the office. And so I had to explain that. So Brady, if you watch this, thanks for that. And he said we did it at a member's house, and that is true, but we did it at Granny Moe's. Did you ever know Maureen Smith?
I don't think I knew her. What area were you in again?
That was Bingham in Dundee.
Oh, in Dundee.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So she was like the Sister M of Dundee.
What was her name, Steve?
What?
What was it?
So Brady Cassidy had this, we'll call it, I don't know, I don't want to call it hazing because I don't think it was hazing, but it was just kind of
but it was. Enjoy
the new mission experience. So he had us where we would write down numbers because we were trying to be so efficient with our time. It'd be like, 1 is help us find people, 2 is be safe, whatever. And then instead of saying a prayer like the typical format, like we would teach people to do and encourage them to do on a daily basis, we would just say, 1, 7, 8, 12, 14, amen, we're good. And then we'd leave, kind of thing. I think we maybe did it like 2 or 3 times. We didn't do it much, but it's just such a funny memory.
That is a funny memory.
Yeah, he was a great trainer. He was such a funny guy. And so I'm going to kind of split this up because Brady was with us for the first 5 weeks, and then I stayed with Ryan for 12 weeks. And so that first 5 weeks obviously overlapped between the 3 of us. And then Brady moved up to Aberdeen, and then that's just kind of how it shook out. And then Brady was also the district leader at that point. So he would kind of drift in and out with the zone leaders and stuff, but it was fun. But I remember my first day, though, he said, all right, you need to experience the old Scotland mission just once and you'll never do it again. And he took me just chapping, like we planned it out and said, you're gonna love this stuff. I think we made it like 6 houses down, and luckily it wasn't raining. But he's like, this is dumb. I'm done with this. Let's go do something else.
Oh, man, Brady, what a quitter.
Yeah. So there you go. But I appreciated that. And so we ended up going over to, Lovell, you served there, right? You remember Fintry?
You can hear you. What?
And, sorry. It was, do you remember Fintry, that area?
Yeah, Fintry,
over there. And we're going to go meet with somebody, I don't remember. And we ran into my first experience with Ned's. And it was really funny because I remember seeing these kids in tracksuits, and they were all, I remember them being pretty small because I'm like 6'3", and Brady's not as tall, but he was just really strong. And then Ryan's a pretty good sized kid too. And so we have this like little group of what looked like 12-year-olds trying to throw rocks at us. And at first I didn't even realize they were throwing rocks because their aim was so bad. And so we just kind of like walked past them as they were yelling stuff at them. And I couldn't even understand them because they were Neds and I'd only been there for like 12 hours. But ultimately we ended up at the maze the maze house. And so I had the opportunity to actually teach the maze. I think it was like their first or second lesson. And
Wow.
that was a really cool experience because I think the May family's been brought up a lot. They're such a cool family because, Derek, he was, I think he served in Salt Lake, but he was a returned missionary. And I don't know what happened with the family, and it doesn't matter, but for some reason they ended up falling away from the church for a little while. But Sister May, or Lisa May, she wanted us to come and teach her two daughters. And her daughters were Laura and Amy, and then they had Paul, but Paul was already baptized, and she was trying to bring the family back to church, and she felt how important it was. And so I had the opportunity to teach them for those first 6 weeks. That was just such a cool experience to see how the gospel really came back into their lives. And one story, because teaching them was awesome, but it wasn't super eventful, not enough to mention here and for the level of detail. But at their baptism, Derek really didn't have any interest when we were teaching him. He would stay kind of aloof. He would find reasons to get out of the house. But Sister May would be there every time. Her daughters would be there because I want to say they were like 9 and 11. They were still pretty young. But when it came to their baptism, Derek showed up. He came in a white shirt and tie. And he, after the girls got baptized, he went up to Bishop Snee, Ian Snee at the time. He's like, hey, you're going to welcome to the ward and stuff. Can I have a brief moment before you do that? And everyone was just kind of like, what's going on? Weren't sure what was going to happen kind of thing. But Derek gets up and he's like, I'm going to try and get through this. I had a dream last night where Paul, my son, and I were walking around with Lisa and the two girls. We were in a park, and there was a clear path around this hill. And the girls decided to go follow the clear path. And I took Paul, and we decided to climb over the hill. And in the dream, the further up the hill I got, the harder and harder it got, until we were closed out, we were separated, we couldn't find each other, and then we ultimately gave up, went back to the path, and made it around the hill. And it's thought so. And that was basically his, reconversion, for lack of better words. But he's like, I realized I did wrong. I need to come back. And he came back so strong. Because I went back a year later to the ward, and I think he was ward mission leader at that point.
Yeah, ward mission leader, yeah.
Yeah, just super solid family, so cool. And every time I read Lehi's dream now, I think of Derek May and that cool story. So
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's just those small things. I remember thinking after that first 6 weeks of like, I could be done today. That's all I need to do. That's all I could leave right now and just be totally done. But that didn't happen. So so then Brady left. Here's another fun Brady Cassidy thing he did. So I love Brady. He was so serious, especially as a district leader. There was this like very formal, very professional Brady, and then there was this like just fun, crazy side of Brady. And I haven't found it yet. I wish I could, but he gave me a list of, it was like 4 pages long of handwritten, just, I don't want to say random nonsense, but it was just like off the cuff things. These are things you need to do before you finish your mission. And like, one of these, you'll recognize how far your influence went, Zach. He said, you need to drink from Loch Ness because the water is magical.
That's true.
So I remember that one, and he said, it's okay to kiss 3 people on your mission. And I don't know where he came up with this stuff. He was just making stuff up. But I need to find that list. If I do, I'll send.
Yes, please scan it and send it.
Yeah,
then we can read it for Brady's posterity's sake. That'd be hilarious.
Oh yeah, we will. Do you have his email or any contact for him?
Yeah, I have his contact. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Yeah, if you would, that would be awesome. Because I want to just email it to him with 0 context and see what he does.
Versus wine copies, yeah, that'd be funny.
Here's another story I shouldn't get into because it's not mine to tell. But if you reach out to him, ask him why Coford punched a hole in the wall in the Bingham flat. So
okay, all right, I will.
He never told me directly.
I'll text him right now.
You should text him or text Kofer and ask him if they remember that. He might have to cut this out. because I don't think he ever told me directly, or maybe he did, but I found a thank you, or not a thank you note, but this like a pink card with kittens on it that was an apology note from Cascade to Coford, like 3 months after Brady left, explaining the scenario, and it was just so bizarre. So I don't know if it's the true story or not, but it was crazy. So
That's pretty funny.
So another thing that Zach brought up, he brought up Buddies.
Yep.
Remember Buddies? So Buddies was like a little breakfast grill down the street. We used to go there every day. You'd get like a really good breakfast for like £1. So that was a thing.
It's still in business.
Yeah. When I go back, I'm gonna go there. But so yeah, then Brady takes off. He goes up to be a zone leader in Aberdeen, and Ryan Gustafson and I are put together for the next 6 weeks. And I love Elder Gustafson. There's always going to be a special place in my heart for him, but he struggled a little bit more in his mission. I hope he doesn't feel bad if he watches this for me saying that, but I think his just experience and his outlook were a little different. But he was such a good missionary. I'll skip to the end of this. I saw him about a week before he went home. He went home a couple weeks early because he had a family trip to Lake Powell or something like that. And so he ended up going home like 2 weeks early so he could get to that family. It was like a huge family reunion. It wasn't just like his parents and brothers and stuff. It was everybody. And so he got approved to go home for that. But I remember seeing him at the mission home because I was serving in Edinburgh at that time. And he just came up to me. He's like, it was a rough road, but I made it. And I just remember thinking that's because he had a pretty rough shake of it for a little bit. I think he served with him around when he was in Bridget Dawn.
Yeah, when he was green. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
He kind of had a rough start, but
He did.
that's just always been a motto. I need to like print that out and stick it on my wall or something. But he did make it. He served a great mission. He did all he could. He was the best he could be, and I'm sure the Lord accepted his service. And he's just a great example and that was the dichotomy of Brady and Ryan, right? So Brady's just like that super positive, just go get it attitude, and Ryan's kind of the lesser, more reserved, we'll say, side of that. But the Lord accepted both of their services, I'm sure. So I will say Ryan and I, we had like 2 weeks where we did not get along. And I think I don't remember if it was McCabe or Paternoster, but Ryan was the district leader at that time. And he was just really struggling. And we were struggling as a companionship. And they taught me the power of companionship inventories at that time, because they just sat us down one day. It was like, we can tell you guys are not getting along. Let's hash this out. And it was a bad 2 weeks. And they basically just like locked us in a room and said, you were going to figure this out or else, kind of thing. And we talked for maybe like 10-15 minutes. That's it. And after that, everything was great. And it was amazing to see how like the area was doing so great. For those 2 weeks, just everything fell apart. And then I think the day after that conversation where we really figured things out, we got a call from a YSA person in the ward, and she said, hey, my roommate wants to learn about the church. And we're just like, oh, well, okay, I guess. And you always go into that little not sure what's going to happen. And her roommate was just super solid. She started coming to church. She kept all the commitments, and she ended up getting baptized. Like, I think it was within that transfers. I'm pretty sure Ryan was there. But awesome. It was just like, and she ultimately went on a temple trip, I know, and then she moved away because she was a college student. So I don't really remember what happened after that. But yeah, that was Elder Gustafson. I do appreciate that he loved like all of that mid 2000s emo music stuff, and he was a pretty good singer. Yeah. So I could use that to my advantage, because he would sing like Synthesis Fail all the time and like the U's and stuff. So if he was ever feeling down or I was tired of Motown, I was like, Elder, you should just sing something, and he would just go for it. So
I concur. I had a situation with him where I was on an exchange, because I was his zone leader when he came out on the mission, and we were just sitting in the car taking a quick 5-minute like brain break. And I said, how are you doing? He said, I miss music. I said, cool. And I turned on the radio, and one of his favorite songs was on. And then we turned it off. I said, you good now? And he said, yep. So it's one of those things where you have to realize that you're not, you're never going to be completely outside of being in the world. It's just finding those little glimpses that bring you joy and then moving forward. So I love Ryan. He's such a good guy.
Yeah, you got to get him on here. I'd love to hear what he's doing now.
I've been trying. So if you have a better contact, give him another push. We'd love to have him on here.
Yeah, so with my job, I've cut like all social media. So I really struggle to get in contact with people now. I need to try and be better, but it's hard.
That's what this is about, though. Is we'll share it. It'll get in front of people. And who knows? Maybe he'll finally get the gusto to answer my messages I've sent him.
Yeah, I'll have to, if I can find his number, I'll call him. But the government screens all my social media stuff, so anything I post, it's great. So
fun.
I think Jack has to deal with that too, from what I've heard. So
yeah, I agree. That's true. Very true.
Yeah, I was talking to Evan Slade today. I was listening to his podcast because he said he worked for Northrop Grumman. So I was listening to his today while I am him at work, and he mentioned the same thing. So
yeah,
it's fun.
Makes it
Don't
tough.
work for the government. I didn't say that though. Now I'm going to get fired.
No, you're not.
They're listening. Oh, actually, I should. So one thing I forgot about before my mission, I got to bring up, because this was crazy. Actually, two things. So back to BYU. Sorry to go back so far. I had a roommate at the time. His name was Kyle. And when I got back to BYU, and everybody's so excited, going to Scotland and stuff, this kid Kyle just picks up the phone. He's just like, you got to talk to my brother. He just got back. And so I'm talking on the phone, and Kyle is Brian Bear's brother.
Oh my word. What a small world.
So my first interaction with anybody from Scotland was Brian Bear. And so Kyle and Brian are like the same person from what I can tell. And so having two of them together, just so pumped, so excited. And I actually listened to Brian's podcast too. And it was so funny because it took me just straight back to college. And so if Brian listens to this, tell Kyle that I still remember that. Because I called Brian, I got his number. I must have called him like a dozen times over the next couple months as I was getting ready to go. And what's on this list I really need to take. And he was such a great guy, such a cool guy. So
I was going to say, I guarantee that Brian loved every second of every phone call. I mean, he left me a voicemail last week, and he's always on top of it. I just love Brian. He's the best.
Yeah. So I'd never met Brian face to face, but Kyle was one of my best friends in college. So
that's so cool.
And then Kyle, I ran into him after, but he ended up going to BYU, Idaho, and I lost contact with him. So yeah, such a cool guy, such a cool family. So
awesome.
Yeah, so there's my shout out to Brian Bear.
I love it.
So back to Dundee. So after Elder Gustafson left, I got to train Ryan Blake, which was a fun experience. So, which at that time in the mission, there was 2 Stephen Gardners. And so when President called and said I was training, I thought he had mistaken me for the other Stephen Gardner. And so I actually asked him over the phone. I was like, are you sure you have the right guy? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure. Well, okay. So yeah, I head down to the mission home and I pick up Ryan. And Ryan, I don't want to say he needed training because he was just ready to go from the start. He was such a great missionary. He was the kind of guy that he read the Book of Mormon before he got baptized when he was 8 because he wanted to have his own confirmation the Book of Mormon was true. Like that's the caliber of guy we're talking about. And so he was awesome. And I remember my first night there because I was out 3 months at this point and he's out maybe 3 minutes. And so we're sitting there in the apartment and there was something wrong with the trains. We didn't get back till like 10:30 at night, which is a great way to start training a missionary, right? You get home over an hour late. And I just remember sitting on the couch like, we're supposed to plan. We'll do it because we got to. But I'll be honest with you, I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm still really new. We're going to do the best we can. We're going to work super hard and we're going to see what comes. And he's like, I'm down. We got this. Let's go. And I will say that the time I had with Ryan which Ryan Gustafson and Ryan Blake and Landon Wells are the 3 companions I had for longer than 6 weeks. Everybody else was one and done. And so I had like 17 companions.
Wow.
And 7 areas. So I moved around a ton, which probably says a lot more about me than anything else. But
I doubt that very, very much.
So to kind of give you a glimpse of Ryan and me and the help we needed from the Lord, we were walking down the street one day and we were trying to do our best. We were running from one appointment to another, and some guy on the street stopped us and said, "Hey, are you guys Jehovah Witnesses?" And we said, "No, we're not. We're Mormons," kind of thing. It's like, "Oh, cool. I love Mormons. Will you come teach me the gospel?" Like word for word, that's what the guy said. And we're like, "Well, sure, we'll try and pencil you in, right?" And so we end up going and teaching this kid, and this kid's awesome. He ultimately didn't get baptized because I think his friends kind of pushed him away from it because he was like 18, something like that.
Yeah.
But he was a really cool guy. But there was another night, and this was like end of October, so right before Guy Fawkes night. And I remember that because in Dundee, and I'm not sure if other places did this in Scotland, but they just took like everything they had and we just put it in big piles. Do you guys remember this at all?
Oh, yes.
Just like ready to burn?
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, it was like a 3-week process of preparing for Guy Fawkes night. And
Oh, yeah.
you're wondering, is there like a garbage cleanup pickup this week or something? Because they just had piles of garbage everywhere. But no,
yeah.
it was so they could set it on fire on the 5th of November.
Which I absolutely loved, because the flat that we lived on in Dundee, we were on Cleppington Road, and we were on the top of it, which is on the top of the hill. And I remember that night where they just started burning everything, and you just looked out. You could see, I think it was the Tay, was that one? But you could see the other side of the 5.
Yeah.
And it was just like the whole world was on fire. And I remember thinking, if I was in Utah, this would be terrifying. But it's so wet that I'm sure these guys are having to put so much lighter fluid and stuff that this will be fine.
Yeah,
So
very true.
But
Very true.
I remember there was one night, and it was freezing cold because it's Scotland in October. And Ryan and I were dropping off a joint teach. It was like 8:45 at night. It was super late. And it was Duncan Mitchell, if you remember him. He was like a 16-year-old. He was a priest in the ward.
I remember him, yeah.
And so we're dropping him off at his house. And Ryan and I just look at each other like, there's someone here that needs the gospel right now. It was a spiritual feeling like I've never had before. And so we just look at each other like, let's start knocking doors. And we knock like 5 or 6 doors in the rain, in the cold. And you know, those houses in Scotland, they got a big front window, and you knock on the door and the people like look over the couch over their shoulder, and there's like, just get out of here kind of thing. And so we're like, okay. So we do that like for 6 houses, and we're like, what a waste of time. This is awful. And so we're like, okay, just one more, which is probably something we should have as our mission slogan, I guess. But we knock on one more house, and this lady comes to the door, opens it. She just says, "Get out of my house, go away." And we're like, okay, whatever, we're done. And she goes to slam the door, and we're walking away, and she says, "Wait, come back. What are you going to say?" And so we teach her like a real quick discussion. And she's like, "Okay, you can come back later." And this lady, we found out later, she was a former investigator, and she had almost been baptized a couple times. And she came to church, and she was baptized like 18, 19 days later. Just super solid lady. And yeah, just such a cool person. So
That is cool.
yeah, that was basically my experience with Elder Blake, which again does not project through the rest of my mission. But yeah, we saw so many miracles.
That's cool.
Then I left Elder Blake, and I got transferred to Kilwinning in the urban ward with Stephen Jones. And Steve Jones I think he was from upstate New York, but and he was a really good guy. I loved Elder Jones. He was super quiet though. I remember that. And I think for me, I kind of needed that because it was really the final, like, you really got to own this. Because nothing against him, but it was just, I felt like I had to do way more. I couldn't share it like I had before, where I had 2 trainers and a super solid companion. It was Not to say he wasn't, but it was just he was so much more reserved. It was harder to get him out of the shell. One thing I will say about him, and this is where my stories are going to pick up a lot. So we're going to speed up a lot because we're like an hour into this. So, but I remember we'd go like hours without talking to each other. Like I would try and talk to him, and he just would not converse with me. Maybe he hated me, and I just haven't realized it till now. That's probably what happened. But we were out in, was it Ardrossan or something? One of those towns like on the far end of our area. It's like January, so it's freezing cold. And all of a sudden, we're standing there on the bus stop late at night trying to get back home, and someone throws a chair out of like the highest level flat, like right into the street in front of us, and it just breaks. And someone just comes down, and there's people yelling and screaming, like this crazy scene. And then he just looks over at me, and he's just like, "Well, that was unexpected." That's all he said. That's a direct quote. I wrote that down. Like, okay, I can't argue with that statement. We did teach one guy, and this was sad. This broke my heart, but we taught a guy and his wife, and she was a very active member of the ward. I can't remember her name. I remember her face though, and yeah, I can't remember her name, but her husband, they've been married for years, and she wanted him to join the church, part of her family. So we were teaching him. He was like scheduled to be baptized. He was coming to church. Everything was going great. And then he just decides one day that he's going to go to the Navy, quote unquote. And so he's going to take the scriptures and all that stuff. He's going to be great. He'll catch us up on the other side when he gets back from deployment, which come to find out was just like a huge cover that he was leaving his wife and just completely abandoning everything. And I just felt so bad for this lady because she ultimately found out. And he moved like down the street and basically moved in with somebody else. And I just felt it was awful. That was one of those first like real hits of Scotland can be awful things to me.
Yeah, goodness.
And, man. This is where I really had my first and only experience with hammer time too. So I'm sure you guys have heard of hammer time and level experienced it. But this is where we had like the one ring when you wake up and things. And I felt like as a district leader, it was way worse because you were kind of stuck in between because you had to take it from the zone leaders and you had to pass it forward because it was like multi-level. It was this level of micromanagement was, I think, ridiculous, frankly. And I feel like at a certain point, we kind of have to give people a pass because we're all trying to be leaders for the first time. The most experienced leadership anyone had was like closing a Blockbuster on Saturday evening or something like that. And like, had we gone back now where we've had other jobs, like we would do things completely differently. So it was really interesting looking in hindsight, the way that President Frederick ran things from the mission side compared to how we tried to run things from the other side down. And just, we were micromanaging to such a level. And yeah, so probably not the best, but we learned those mistakes, I guess. But yeah, so I felt that the one ring nonsense, and I just remember thinking, how could I ever fake a one ring? How could I ever call and hang up really quick and not be doing exactly what I thought or what you thought I'd be doing? And just, yeah. So yeah, 6 weeks at Elder Jones, and he took off. And then I trained Elder Levitt. So yeah, I feel like I have a pattern here of, I actually counted it out. I listened to Elder Lucas's too, and he said he had like 18 or 19 companions. And I think that was the max. But I think I had like 7 of my first 10 companions I got at the mission home. So like every move, I wasn't just getting a call from President. I had to go to the mission home and pick up my companions, which was really fun. I'm sure it was cost effective too, but so yeah, and I got Elder Levitt. He was from Gunlock, Utah, and I loved Elder Levitt. He was great. He had the strongest accent that did not sound like it came from St. George, Utah. So it sounded like way more of like a Savannah, Georgia drawl kind of thing to me, but he was such a great guy. He worked so hard. I remember one of his first days there, he was like, "I've heard bad things about Glasgow. Are we safe here?" And I remember saying, we're not really in Glasgow. We're pretty safe. And I'm saying this as we're walking back to our apartment, and I can see a helicopter with a spotlight kind of flying around. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of by our apartment, but we're far enough away. Don't worry about it. We get closer to our apartment. The helicopter gets closer to our apartment, and we're turning the corner to go into our parking lot. And there's a guy covered in blood running with a knife that just goes running past us, and a bunch of cops chasing him. And I was like, well,
Oh my gosh.
we're safe. We're fine. Don't worry about it. So I'm pretty sure at that point I lost all credibility. And then like 2 weeks after that is when I saw my first person shoot up heroin with Elder Levitt too, which was another fun experience. So,
Oh boy.
yeah. Sorry, Elder Levitt.
I don't think you did that. It was the other person. So
Yeah.
no worries there for you, Steve.
So he also he really struggled to kind of pick up the language like a lot of us did. And so I had a really good idea of, well, we had some extra time one night and there was a pub like right across the street from our apartment. I was like, we're just going to go talk to all the drunk guys that are smoking outside the pub. Just so you could at least, like, we don't even have to talk to them about the gospel. I just want you to hear what these people are saying to see. Because if you can understand the drunk ones, you can understand the sober ones. And that was my logic, right? Sound logic, right?
That's pretty sound, yeah.
So we go up to these guys and start talking to them and stuff. And I don't remember what they're saying, but I remember like the one guy's there that we're talking with, engaging with, and I'm talking to him and I'm talking to Levitt to say, hey, you know, you should say something. And the guy just like grabs my face and kisses me square on the lips. Oh, great. So, and
Hey, at least it was
gross,
at least it was that kind of a kiss and not a Glasgow kiss.
I know. Well, I don't know. It's debatable at this point. But what's the best part of that?
You mean he was trying to headbutt you and he just landed on your lips?
I don't know. I didn't stop and ask for questions. After that, we were done and we went home.
All right, good night.
I needed to brush my teeth.
Brush your teeth. Oh, goodness.
But going back to Brady's list, I remember checking off one of those kisses I was able to do.
Oh, you have to find that list. Oh my gosh.
I know. It's
sure.
gotta be. I have a full packet of just random missionary stuff that I collected. But I remember reading it like my whole mission and just laughing. It was so funny. I wonder if he remembers it, even doing that. But yeah, good times. So I was with Elder Levitt 5 weeks, and then I got called into the office to be one of the office elders, which was not something I wanted to do, not something I was excited to do. So I went over to Edinburgh, and I was first with Elder Egbert Huber from Austria, which he was an awesome guy. So this is so a lot of people talk about the negative of Hammer Time, and this is my spin to positive of Hammer Time, because you hear about these kind of the forefathers of it, like O'Brien and Stringfellow and these guys, and Lucas and that, and just kind of these Glasgow guys. And my understanding of it, and I was talking to Evan about it today too, we felt that we never really experienced Hammer Time because we really didn't serve in Glasgow. And my understanding was it was kind of a Glasgow thing, but so many people went through Glasgow that they just kind of got pushed around. And that was kind of my feeling. I still feel that way today because I served Dundee and Aberdeen for like the vast majority of my mission. So, but yeah, so I go there and I'm not excited. I'm not sure if I'm like wearing my emotions on my sleeve or whatnot, but it was like one of my first couple days there, and I was trying to work late, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do down there in the office. And Brad Stringfellow comes in. He's like, "Hey, I just want to talk to you for a few minutes." And I was like, "Oh, great, here it goes," kind of thing, right? Expecting him kind of to cut loose on me, and he just like we have like the nicest conversation about, you know, why am I here? What am I doing? What's the purpose of me being here? And I told him straight up, like, I do not want to be an office elder. This wasn't on my radar. This isn't what I wanted to do. I'll do what I need to do, but I was not excited about this. And he's like, well, I can't tell you too much because President likes to play his cards close to the chest kind of thing, but you won't be here a long time. Your intention isn't to be an office elder. We really want you to get your driver's license. and we want you to kind of observe some of the things that go on in the mission home, because very few missionaries get to serve this close to President Frederick. And that just completely changed my stance on what was going on. And so I really appreciated that from him. I'm sure he does not remember that to this day, but if he sees this, hopefully he sees this and he realizes what an impact that had, that there's a bigger vision than just my understanding of what's going on. So, and then like a couple weeks after that, President Frederick came up to me too, and President, he was very standoffish on things, right? Standoffish isn't the right word, but he was very much I'm going to let things play out. I'm not going to tell everybody everything, which I absolutely love that leadership style of the you need to learn for yourself. But this is like the one thing I got direct from him was, you need to get your driver's license. That's the same thing. So now I had President and Stringfellow tell me that. So I was like, okay. So I decided at that point, luckily I had taken my theory test, because that was so easy to do, right? You just read the book and you're good to go. And so I went up, and I remember scheduling my driving test like that day for like as soon as I could. I had like 9-10 days to prepare, which we know the British driving test is super easy, right? That's such a good idea in hindsight. So, and the plan was I would take the assistant's car, and I scheduled in Dunfermline because that was the closest. Looking back, that's a different zone. I don't think I ever got it approved or anything. So I just left the zone for a couple hours. But like a couple days before I went to take my driving test, the mission transfer stuff went on. It was the end of moves, and Cofford was going home. And Cofford drove the assistant's car to the airport and then proceeded to take the assistant's car keys with him home. And so their car was stuck at the airport for like a week or something like that. And so I had no access to their car. So then my options were either find a car on zero notice or drive the mission van. And so luckily, Elder Myers and Sister Myers, who were just amazing, they let me borrow their car, and I was able to go up and do that. But before doing that, I have to tell you about my driving experience with Elder Lucas, because I went to Elder Lucas. I was like, hey, I want to drive. I need to pass this test. Can you help me do it? And so Elder Lucas gave me like a 30-minute driving test practice, like 2 or 3 days, something like that, like right before, like just right around the mission home. And to sum it up, it was basically him yelling, wrong, wrong, you're never going to wrong, just over. That was my experience with Elder Lucas, at least my recollection of it. And so, wow. I think this time I'm with Elder Philip. The timeline gets really, really kind of blurred there. But so yeah, then I get Elder Myers' car. I drive up. I go to Dunfermline. By some miracle, I pass first time, which I don't know how that happened, but I was really grateful for that. So
good for you.
So that was an experience. And then when I got back to the mission home, I think Lucas had a bet with somebody that I would fail, because I remember he had to pay somebody like £5. Not that we bet as missionaries, but I remember that happening.
Lucas would, definitely.
Yeah. Especially when he was going to win. So one other story with Lucas, all of us kind of lived together, so it all kind of blows together. But I was with Elder Philip at this point. This is when Elder Holland came. I remember we went to the zone conference, and it was great. I won't add too much to what others have said, because I'm sure others have covered it, and I'm kind of running long. But Elder Philip, Elder Lucas, and I were there. I'm trying to remember who the other assistant was at that time, but I don't remember. Maybe it was Stringfellow? I don't remember. But we were, after Elder Holland comes, everybody's so pumped. And Elder Holland stayed at the mission home. And so it's like 10:15, 10:30, like we probably should be going to bed. And we're just kind of hanging out in that upstairs office area, where that was in the mission home. And the way the mission home was, right, kind of had the mission home here, and then 90 degrees to it, you had that area. And so we're all there just kind of looking out the windows, kind of messing around. And all of a sudden we look out, and Elder Holland is standing there in his pajamas. And he's kind of just like pulling the curtain shut, getting ready to go to bed. And we just all hit the floor, except I think Elder Philip like pins in between the two windows. like trying to hide, like little kids getting caught sneaking downstairs during Christmas. And so then we're like discussing as quietly as we can, like, do you think he saw us? Then we like sneak off into bed, like hoping we didn't get caught, which nothing ever came of that. But I remember that because he had red silk pajamas and they looked really comfortable. But
Sounds nice.
there you go. So yeah, I remember the Edinburgh Award was great, but I remember just absolutely hating it because there were so many missionaries there that we had this like really narrow wedge. All of us had this, I don't know who designed the areas, but it was basically they drew a circle around Edinburgh and then started making like pizza slices going off of it. And so, and the rule was you couldn't leave your area. And so if you found somebody, which 90% of the time they're in somebody else's area, you're just like constantly passing people around. It was awful. So Edinburgh Award was great. The people were great. Everything was great. But the way the areas were done was just awful. And I remember wanting to get out of there as soon as I could, which luckily I was only there for 3 months. So then I go back to Dundee, and I'm going to try and lump these together too, unfortunately, because it kind of blurs together a lot. But I had John Kuhn, then I had Stephen Beth Taylor, and I trained Joseph Hawkins. And they were all three great missionaries. So I remember John Kuhn. I remember when I got there, he'd been there like 7.5 months, and it was his first area. So he knew it inside and out. And I remember him saying, no, I want to lead the area. I want to do it. And I was all for that. It was great. But I just remember John, he worked so hard, and he was such a great missionary. And I just remember there was nothing he would ever do to like bend the rules or twist them or anything like that. He was just so stalwart. And I actually called John before this because this is when we had the 6:30 baptism with Ben Leuven, which I think we've talked about a few times on here.
I've heard about it. Yeah.
Yes. So
That's part of it.
Whipple was there for it.
I was brand new out on the mission.
Because I remember one day I got a call from Van Leuven, and he's like, we just baptized somebody at 6:30 in the morning. Everything's great. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. So my story with Van Leuven, you got to get Justin on here to talk about his version of this, because I'm pretty sure I was with Elder Beth Taylor, because John didn't remember this, and there's no way he'd forget it. But we had an investigator we were interviewing for baptism, and Justin, I think, was with Bockham at the time. But so Beth Taylor and Chad went into the house to do the baptism interview, and then Justin and I just stayed out in the car because we figured it wouldn't take. One of those like diaphragm turkey calls, we get seen those like this, and you set them on your tongue and you blow across them and it makes a turkey call, and they're super loud. Yep. And so we're sitting there in the car, and he's got the windows down, and he's just like playing with this call for must have been like a good 10-15 minutes. And then all of a sudden this little kid comes out. He's like 4 or 5. He just runs outside. He picks up a stick and like start playing in the mud and hitting a tree and, doing little kid things. And so he takes out his camera and he's just like taking pictures of stuff. And he takes a picture of this kid and just like, kind of relaxing for a few minutes. And out of nowhere, this cop just shows up at the side of our window. And she says, what are you guys doing here? And Justin's kind of taken back. And he's like, well, I'm taking pictures of that kid. And I was like, that's the wrong thing to say in this scenario. I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to get arrested and shipped out of here because you're going to say the stupidest thing. And so she didn't pull us out of the car or anything like that, but she's like, well, what are you talking about? We're taking pictures of kids. We were investigating a noise. He's like, oh yeah, that was us too. And just like everything this lady's investigating, he's admitting to. And so she takes his camera, she looks through his pictures, and she's like, well, I don't think I can charge you anything, but you better leave right now or we're going to charge you with loitering. And so we're in the car, so we just take off. And I feel like 2 or 3 minutes later, Baco calls. He's like, why did you guys leave? What's going on? And we had to make him like walk like a half mile up around the corner to find us because we didn't want the cops to arrest us for loitering. So you got to get Justin on and see if he remembers almost getting arrested in Dundee.
I've heard that Justin has quite a few stories that if we got him on here, he would, probably be on for a few hours. So I've invited him and he said not yet. So yeah, that was a few months ago. So I'll keep working on it.
Add my name to his request list because he's got some great stories. He's a legend. So another crazy story I had. So I want to say Paternoster was the AP for this, but I don't remember. But so do you remember the Keel family? Do you guys ever know them?
Yeah, I did know the Keel family. Yes.
So
I did too.
So Becky was their second daughter, I think, and she had a lot of different health problems and stuff.
Yep.
And I remember there was a time her dad was out on business or something like that, and so she called us because we lived just down the street from him. She's like, "Hey, I need a blessing. I feel awful." And so we go over there and we give her a blessing. And I remember being horrified at the end of this blessing because I blessed her that basically things were going to get a lot worse before they get better. And I just remember feeling so guilty. And so I forget if it was like zone conference the next day, but I remember Paternoster being part of this. So we'll have to get him on here to see if he remembers this too. But I ended up telling him this story. He's like, I did that once too. I blessed somebody that they would get worse before they got better. I was like, oh, okay, cool. How did that turn out? He's like, well, the next day she fell in the tub and hit her head on the sink and died on impact. I was like,
oh boy,
oh my goodness. Like that, first off, it was a horrible story. And second off, did not make me feel better in the least.
Jeez.
And so, and like a day after that, Becky's, I don't think her appendix burst, but it was to the point where it was like almost going to burst. And so she had to go into like emergency surgery but ultimately she recovered, but it was just crazy. Wow. But yeah, other Paternoster needs to work on his bedside manner a little bit there.
Pretty funny.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about Sister Smith from Bingham.
Oh, Granny Mo?
Yeah, Granny Mo.
Granny Mo was great. She was so funny. She made me a birthday cake right before I left the first time. And because my mom sent me out like a cake mix because she wanted me to have a birthday cake on my mission because my mom is sweet like that and very considerate. And I asked Granny Mo to make it for me. I don't remember why. And I remember when she made the cake, instead of being flat, like she must not have mixed it right because it came out like this. It was like stepped. And she was such a funny person. So, but she would do anything for the missionary. She was such a great member. But I've heard she passed. So I think she had like brain cancer or something, and then
passed away.
Yeah, she was phenomenal. She was such a cool person. So, so the guy that we interviewed to be baptized with Van Leuven, his name was Chris, and he was doing great, and then he had some rough friends, and they ended up putting him in the hospital. And I think I was with Beth Taylor at this point. I might have been with Hawkins. But stupid story. We ended up going to the hospital to see him to make sure he was doing okay. And there was a bunch of people outside the hospital that were smoking cigarettes talking about who was going to take the next hit. I was like, whoa, what does that mean? I looked and there was a guy and he had his hand up like this. And he had like a crossbow bolt that was about the size of this pencil, went through his hand, through his palm. And so what they were talking about is they were so drugged out of their minds, they were shooting each other in the hand so they could go to the hospital and get drugs. And so then the nurse came out and had him put out a cigarette so they could go do surgery and take the thing out of his hand. And then their other two friends were out there, but he saw us going in and he just said, I look like Jesus because my hand is pierced. I was like, oh my goodness, this is so wrong on so many levels.
Oh boy, goodness.
Yeah, that was my favorite story of Dundee.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, then this is where I moved up to Aberdeen. So I left Dundee, and this was that crazy moves I had with Zach. So this is where we first met for the first time. Because I remember they were taking a class.
Dundee? We met when you was in Dundee though. When I was spending that you flat after the tattoo.
So I don't remember that. I remember my first tattoo because Peacock ran up and down the bus singing Tiny Dancer because there was an Elton John concert in Inverness. And he spent like a half hour singing Elton John songs running up and down the bus.
That's Peacock, definitely.
Yeah. Because I'd heard rumors of this Peacock guy. And everybody's like, that's him. Which Peacock was hilarious. Yeah, I don't remember
S.E.M. legend.
Yeah, I don't remember everybody crashing our flat. I mean, I could totally see that because we had a big flat in Dundee, but the zone leaders had a pretty big one too.
The next day we played American football, and Sister Mary tackled at about Taylor.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Gosh.
Yeah. So I remember though when we were moving up to Aberdeen, they took a car. They were moving it from Edinburgh all the way up to Aberdeen because they picked you up in Glenrothes, right?
I think so.
And then you came and met me in Liff, and Sister Ott was coming from Edinburgh, and then we like drove up because they took away our cell phones because we were going to new areas, and we had never been to Aberdeen before. And they just said, well, follow the coast road and you'll see the church on the left. Just don't turn. Which is like, okay, that works in America because turns are, right angles, but you hit roundabouts in Scotland. And I remember we hit that first roundabout in Aberdeen because I'd been all the way up through Montrose or Arbroath, whichever one's further north. I'd made it that far. But beyond that, I'd never seen anything. And there was that roundabout that had 5 spokes or whatever, and one of them goes down to Union Street. So I remember we went down to Union Street and we were so lost. And then finally we had to ask somebody, which it's hard to ask for directions as a missionary because their initial approach is, you're going to teach me about Jesus. I don't want that. Go away. Until you say, I just want directions. And then they're really helpful.
True.
But somehow we made it. So, and then that's when you and I were with Hawks in that threesome.
Yep.
Because President called and he said, hey, Elder Munden's going to go home soon because I think he had a collapsed lung.
Is a collapse lung or a heart defect or something? Yeah.
Yeah. But he's like, he's going to go home. He needs to get surgery or something in the next week. So they put us there as a 3. And then Munden stuck it out for the whole transfers until the last couple days. But
And then
anyway.
Hawks of Munden. Not Munden with Dumida.
Yeah. And then you talked about Taylor and Stevie and yours, Zach. I heard that one.
You can talk about it though. You was there.
So the only thing I want to add to your story is I remember I think it was the second time we taught her. We taught Taylor in the Sims home. And I remember it was just super uncomfortable because I feel like the whole thought of the Aberdeen ward at that time was we're pushing people too fast. That was kind of the vibe of the whole mission, right? And then Hawks, I don't think at that point, because he was still pretty new, I don't think he'd ever invited anyone to be baptized. And Hawks can come in and say that or not. But we said, if you feel right, you got to invite her to be baptized kind of thing. And we get to that point in the lesson, and Hawks extends the invitation. And I remember it was Hannah Sims, audibly gasped. And there was this long, awkward pause. And Taylor's like, oh, yeah, I totally want to be baptized. It was just on board from the start. She's like, I wanted to be baptized the whole time. And she was just super solid. And then she ended up serving in Cincinnati. And this, we're going way back. My friend Nick, who was with me when I opened my mission call, he had moved to Cincinnati at this point. And so I get a random call from him 4 or 5 years after I get home. He's like, hey, do you know Taylor Lowe? She's at my house right now. I was like, I totally taught and baptized her in Scotland. And it was just such a small story small world that she ended up at my old roommate's house in Cincinnati, and he thought to call, and it was cool that she'd done so well.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so he's such a cool guy. But yeah, Stevie and Taylor, they were definitely highlights of my mission to see how well they did and see the gospel in their lives, because I feel like that really had a turning point for the ward, where they had such a cool experience. And the other thing with that is they actually lived in the Bridge of Dawn ward. So I think we had to go to President Payne to get special permission for them to come.
Yeah, to get permission, yeah. They were close to the boundary though.
Yeah, they lived 100 yards from the Aberdeen church, but the way the boundaries were drawn, they had to drive all the way to Bridge of Dawn or something. So
sounds about right with church boundaries.
So, and then I was talking to Zach about this. I have this book that was written by Stanley Robertson. Do you remember him from the Aberdeen ward?
Stanley's a legend.
So he was such a cool guy. But I remember Hawks took us there the first time. He's like, hey, we have to be careful because if we go in this house, we'll be there for at least 2 hours. I was like, oh, whatever. We'll try and keep it to 45, whatever. And Hawks was right, because we sat down and Stanley just started telling us these stories. I swear it was like 5-10 minutes, and it was like 2.5 hours later. He was just such a cool, captivating person. And he just had a way of telling stories because he was a professional storyteller, right? And this book that he wrote, he actually got an honorary doctorate from the University of Aberdeen for the work, because he wrote this in Doric.
Oh,
So
wow.
this isn't actually written in true English, but it's all written in Doric. So actually, to read it today, I have to look up a dictionary to translate it, because it's a cool book. But he actually signed that copy for me because it went out for sale at a really limited section, and it was in the bookstore, and I went like for the 2 weeks it was there and bought it. And it's such a cool book. So if anyone wants to borrow it or something, we'll have to figure that out. But we looked him up on Zach Lovell, and I looked him up on Amazon. They're like $50 right now. So we'll figure out an exchange somehow. People want to borrow it.
Nice.
But yeah. So then I went with. So yeah, then Elder Munden went home for a couple days, and everything was in crazy disarray. And then we had moves, and you stayed with Hawks, and I went over with Landon Wells to the Bridget Onward.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was fun. And so I have kind of a few stories about Landon, and I kind of split them up into P-days, church stuff, and just random craziness that doesn't make any sense to anyone. So let me know if you don't want any of these. But so keeping with the church stuff, you guys remember President Payne, right?
Yes.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I remember President Payne playing college baseball. Do you guys remember that?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I don't remember that, but probably, yeah.
Okay, so I think I got to know him pretty well, and I don't know if that's true or not, but like he wasn't the tallest guy, but he was solid. And so the reason I remember him playing college baseball is so Wells and I think this was still kind of the flow down from the 630 baptism in Dundee that kind of spread through the whole mission stuff. But President Frederick called us and said, "Hey, we got a meeting with President Payne. We're all going to be there, and set it up and all this stuff. And we're going to talk about missionary work. We're going to see what we can do," because he wasn't super on board at that time. But it's like we're going to do what we can to help him get on board. And the day of the meeting, it snowed pretty hard. And so President Call is like, "Hey, I'm not going to be there. You two got it. Have fun." And so we drive up to the Aberdeen ward, and we're talking in the parking lot about how we're going to approach this stuff. And we're kind of nervous because President Payne, he was a pretty intimidating guy, and the youth there were having a massive snowball fight in the parking lot at this time because all the snow, and this snow was like super heavy, wet, dense snow. And President Payne walks out to get something out of his car, and all the youth are like, "Well, there's the stake president. Let's just pelt him with snowballs." And he's like, "No, don't get me," and all that stuff. And I think it was one of the Goldie picked up a snowball and chucked it and like barely nicked President Payne as he's walking back in. And President Payne just like takes out his hand and just like scoops along the back of a car, packs a snowball, turns and just shoots a rocket right at one of the Goldie boys. And it's like square in the chest and knocks him to the ground. And it just like didn't break a step. And Wells and I are just sitting there watching this, like, oh my goodness, we got to go talk to this guy about missionary work. And so we're like, well, and now the snowball fight's obviously over because they're not sure what's going on here. He's cracked a rib. And so we go in and we talk to him, and it was like the best conversation we could have had. It was President Payne was so awesome, so on board. He was ready to do missionary work, and I think it's because we took the approach of we want to work together. We don't want it to be a competition between us and you, and build those bridges. And he was just awesome. He was such a cool guy. So another family we worked with was the Dressels. Did you guys ever know the Dressels in Bridget Dawn?
Doesn't ring
I
a
didn't
bell.
know him, yeah.
Okay, so they were less active for a while. So Brother Dressel was actually the stake president, I think, before President Gilmore. And they were put on loan to the Buchan Ward, right? The Buchan Ward that covered like Banff and Peterhead and all that, right?
Yeah,
Peterhead, yep.
And so when President Payne took over, I think, they weren't sure if they were supposed to return to Bridge Dawn or go back to Buchan. And they took like a 3-week vacation. And in that time, they basically just went less active. And so Sister Dressel started coming back because she had a grandson she wanted to go on a mission. So she told us to come over and just read the Book of Mormon with her. And so we did. And come to find out, it was kind of like Brother May, where Brother Dressel would be like up around the corner just listening to his wife and his grandson read the Book of Mormon with these missionaries. And that's all we did. And just one day he just showed up in the conversation with us. He's like, all right, I got to come back to church. And like from that day on, he was just super solid again, just a stalwart member. So just that's all it took was him listening to his wife read the scriptures. And he was such an awesome guy, but just such a small, simple correction to his life. And he was like a professor at the school. He was such a cool guy.
Interesting. Wow.
And then one more member story. All right, I feel like I'm going long. Do you want to cut this?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. All right.
Carry on.
So, did you know Craig Sinclair? The Sinclair family?
The name sounds familiar, but I'm not putting a face with the name.
So, Craig Sinclair, he was not super into missionary work. He had a couple sons that were moving into college. And so he asked me and Wells to help him just move his kids in one weekend. He's like, if you help me move them in, I'll go on a joint teach with you, trade services kind of thing, which that's fine. We'll do it for free kind of thing. And so which was a really weird experience because Wells and I had like 6 months left at this time, or maybe a little longer than that. And going to a college was a very weird experience during moving day because it was like kind of the next phase of life. But yeah, we did that. And he's like, okay, well, let me know when you got to teach. And the only somewhat solid investigator we had was a kid that was studying for a PhD to be a minister in like the Church of Scotland or something. And so we're like, well, he wants to do it. We'll bring him here. At least the guy will keep the appointment. And so we take him and we go to this appointment and it goes for like an hour and a half. And the whole time he's looking at his watch. It's going really late. And the conversation, I would say, was more combative than productive, where it's like he's trying to prove us wrong. And we'd kind of given up on this point. It was like, well, we're going to prove you wrong. And the whole time he doesn't say a single word. And we're like, well, this sailed like a lead balloon. And so we go back to the car and we'd got a parking ticket. And that was great. So now we're upset because we got a parking ticket. We have to take him back. And now we're late getting back home. And just like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And we get back to drop him off at his house. He's like, elders, I got to tell you something. It's like, oh, great. Here it comes. He's like, that was the most spiritual experience I've had in my life in a long, long time. Wow. And he's like, whatever you need from now on, let me know. I'll be there for you guys. And after that, he was like finding friends for us to teach and just like complete night and day. And he was such an awesome guy too. It was such a cool family.
How cool.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard he was like a patriarch now. But I don't know if that's true. So don't quote me. But
interesting.
But yeah, he was such a cool guy. So Wells and I also got to do Pratt's Hill at this time because this was end of the year, which climbing Pratt's Hill, we did that as a zone leader council. So at the end of the year, President Frederick would bring all those zone leaders together and then he'd go climb Pratt's Hill and like account for the last year's goal and then kind of dedicate the next year's goal, which was a really cool experience until you climb Pratt's Hill in like end of December, early January in full suit and tie in the snow and the cold and the wet and the rain. So we went up there. It was great, but it was so cold. And I remember at that zone leader conference, Elder Patel, he was there because I think he was zone leader in like Dundee at that time. But I just remember thinking Elder Patel is just a rock star. I'd love to serve with that guy, which we'll get to that soon. But all right, so now this is where Wells and I had fun but less spiritual experiences. So I did go to Loch Ness. I did drink from Loch Ness. So check that off the Brady list.
Well done.
And then Hawks and Lovell, you guys asked me to bring water back from Loch Ness when I came back and told you about it. So I had like a protein powder, like one of those 5-gallon jugs. So I was like, I'll fill this up. And I did. And I filled it up and I looked at that water and I'm so glad I drank it before because I would never drink that again. It was like green and filthy. But yeah, we brought 5 gallons of Loch Ness water back to Elder Hawks.
That's why I look so young still.
Yeah.
That's it. It's a secret.
Fountain of youth.
All right. So I got 3 stories. Which one do you want to hear first? So Wells and I hiked Ben Nevis. we went go-karting with the stamps, and we ended up being kilt models for Philip King.
No way. Kilt models for sure. I want to hear that story.
Yeah,
How did that happen?
So being good missionaries, we went up to Philip King, who owned the kilt shop, right, in the ward. And we just went up to him and was like, hey, do you need any help with anything? And he just kind of like stares at us for a second, kind of looks us up and down. And at this point, Wells and I, we were running like 5 miles a day and working out at night. We were both in great shape.
Wow.
And this was kind of preparatory to hiking Ben Nevis. But he's like, I need help with a photo shoot in the future. You guys want to help out with that? And our thought is he just needs help like moving stuff or something. It was like, sure, we'll help out, whatever you need. I was like, okay, I'll call you. And so he doesn't call us for like 3 weeks, and we kind of forgot about it. And he calls us, he's like, all right, 6:30 tomorrow evening, be at this address. Like, okay. And we show up. Oh, and he's like, bring the Elders Quorum president too, because the Elders Quorum president had a full beard. And I guess that's a requirement. So we show up, and he has like a whole assortment of kilts for us to model for him.
Oh man.
We're like, I don't know if we could do this, but whatever. And so we spent like 2 hours with him, and we were his kilt models for like a couple of years, like on his website. I actually have it on my phone. Let's see if I can find it. I know, because I gotta have a picture. It didn't happen, right?
Did you get pictures of every single variation that you were in that you were able to take home?
Yes.
Speak and let the people see it.
Yeah, so this is one of the pamphlets. Elder Wells is on this too, but I just chopped it for me. But this is me on Philip King's brochure for his kilt model business.
That's amazing.
And so when I met my wife, the first time she ever showed me to her parents, she pulled up his website and said, it's that guy.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so that's how my in-laws first met me, or at least saw me, I guess.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that was allowed or not, but that definitely happened. So, but yeah, he gave us all the pictures for it, because he's like, if you guys want to get into modeling or whatever, it's there, go for it. But unfortunately, that did not
break into show starness. Goodness.
Yeah, I'll stick with engineering, I guess.
Nice.
So yeah, but with that, so Wells and I, when we first got together, we were like, we want to do something big, something that like no one else has ever done before. And so we were kind of thinking about stuff and things, and we ended up talking to some expat couple that was there, and like, what are some cool things you've done while you're here in Scotland before you go back to the United States? They said the hands down, the best thing you got to do is hike Ben Nevis. I was like, okay, it's just done. We'll do it. And so it's amazing how little planning we put into this, considering what it was, because it's like Jan. I didn't like to lie when it's nice and you can get away with zero planning. But we're just like, all right, we can do this. And so we kind of asked him where the parking lot was, and we're like, do you have any hiking boots? And they had boots for Wells. And I had like those, you remember those like Velcro Ned shoes you get?
Oh yeah.
Those like white ones. I was wearing those. But we go Sunday night and we crash at the Inverness Elders Flat. And we didn't tell them we're coming or anything, because we know they had an extra room. And, obviously we're pulling out like backpacks and stuff, and they kind of catch on to what we're doing. And we're just like, okay, here's the deal. We're going to go for Ben Nevis tomorrow. If you guys want in, you're welcome. But, we're sticking together as companions. And they're like, oh, we're in. And so next day we get up early, we drive down to Fort William, we find the parking lot, we see Ben Nevis, like, all right, there it is. And so we had like extra jackets and stuff because it's freezing cold. And we start hiking up the mountain. Unbeknownst to us, it's a 10-mile hike. Like, I did not know that at that time. I looked it up for this conversation. So Wells and I, we're in like jeans, and he had the boots on, but we're like in t-shirts, jeans, and like a hoodie and like our missionary coats, whatever we had. And we make it like the first mile. It's like, it's getting kind of hot. So we take like our outer layers off and like hide it in the woods, hoping we can find it on the way back. And at this time, it was Needham and Solitos, I think, were the two. And they'd bail. They're like, we don't want this. We gave them the car keys. We said, have fun at Fort Williams. We got phones. We'll call you. And we just keep on trucking. And we get to the snow line, and the clouds have come in. It's a blizzard. We're like, we're going for it. There's switchbacks to get up. We did not see the switchbacks. We just went straight up. And when you get to the top of Ben Nevis, there's these like rock columns. And we would find one through the clouds the best we could, kind of guess where the next one is, and then walk off into the distance hoping we find it. It's like, I'm sure God had his finger on the smite button, and because we were missionaries, he didn't push it. But other than that, like, there's no way we should have survived it. But we keep trucking, we get to the end, and there's like a little hut there that in the summer they sell like biscuits and stuff. It's obviously closed because we're the only ones up there. And we also didn't know that there's a huge cliff on the other side of that we could not see. And so we get, and we're obviously freezing at this point because we're in a blizzard. We're in like cotton like hoodies. And it's like, all right, we got to get down before we freeze to death. And we're trying our best to follow our footprints out because that's the only thing we can see. And the snow is so hard, it's like covering our footprints. We're like, well, we just got to get down. And so we, by some miracle, we end up finding the trail. And right as we hit the snow line again, there is a rescue crew coming up. And these guys are like climbing ropes, crampons, full Gore-Tex, like dressed, ready to go for days. And like, oh my goodness, we found you guys. You guys didn't go much further, did you? We're like, oh yeah, we made it to the summit. Like it's that way. It's like, we know there's a lost group up here. Like they got stuck in an avalanche. We're like, oh, that's not us. But good luck finding them. And we just like book it out of there. Because our biggest concern at this point was we got to be home by 6. Like it never occurred to us that this was like a crazy life-threatening situation, at least at the time, because we were dumb missionaries. But yeah, so we made it up to Ben Nevis and we got back to the car and we had just enough time that we could drive over to Glenfinnan, see the Glenfinnan Viaduct before heading back to Inverness.
Oh my gosh.
That was, I would say, probably the stupidest thing I've done, if not on my mission in my life. But it was fun. So,
My gosh. Good for you.
yeah, it was a good time. The only thing I can think that saved us is because we were running so much. Because we ran every day. Even before like zone conferences and stuff, we would get up at like 4 a.m. and run. So we were in good enough shape that we could just keep moving. But yeah, it was not great. So yeah, I talked about the go-karting thing. That was pretty interesting because the part that I remember most about the go-karting, it was Sean Waite, which I think you've been trying to get him on.
Yeah.
You got to get him on to tell the story because he'll do it better than me. But I remember we were at the Stamped house, all of us together, and I feel like Sean had like a really expensive watch, like a Seamaster Omega or something like that, because his dad like ran some bike shop and sent it to him. And so it was the stupidest conversation I can remember, if I remember it right. But it was Brother Stamp was giving Sean a hard time about having such an expensive watch. And then Sean was like, well, you drive this blacked out M5. And it was just kind of like, I don't even know where they were going with this. But ultimately it got to the point where Sean was like, I'll bet I could drive that car faster than you. And Brother was like, no way that's happening. He's like, I'll prove it to you. And he sets up this like go-kart event for the missionaries. It's like you go and you do a flying lap and get timed and then you race. Like it was a whole P-Day thing. It was so much fun. But it was just so Stamp and Waite could race. And they finished 1 and 2 in the time trials. And they were like leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. And so basically it was like a bunch of people playing around in go-karts, being traffic cones. And then these two were just flying around the circuit.
Wow.
And I don't know if I want to ruin it for you because it'll give Sean a time to either come in and defend himself or claim victory. But I feel like he should come in and finish the story.
All right, I'll make sure that I remember that when we get in touch with Sean.
Yeah, if he doesn't, then let me know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, Aberdeen had so much to offer. Because we had like Slains Castle, Bowlers of Buchan. Did you ever go to Findhorn when you were there?
I don't think I did.
Okay. Findhorn was the hippie community by Elgin.
Nope, never stopped there. I'm sure of it.
They had really good pie. Everything else was really weird. But we found that. I don't remember who told us about it, but the other thing we did, we'll have to ask Chase Crockett if he ever comes on here, if he remembers this. But do you remember this level when we had Chase? He was out like maybe 2 weeks. And it was Burns Night in Aberdeen, and it was kind of like a stake activity, so both swords were together. And they wanted one of the missionaries to pipe in the haggis, which is like a very formal, very, professional kind of thing. And we told everybody that Chase, who had barely been to Scotland, would be the best one to do it.
I do remember that. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
So it's like you have to march in step to the tune and all this stuff, and you have to hold it at a right angle and stuff. And he's like, and of course, we're all out in the hallway dying as he's like struggling to walk around the gym holding the haggis. And I don't know if he found that as funny as the rest of us did, though.
Probably not in the moment, but maybe in hindsight.
That's one of my favorite memories. He was such a cool guy. I'll have to get him on here too. All right, so now we're back to Elder Patel. So I was with Elder Wells for 3 months. He was my third 3-month companion. And then Elder Patel, which I listened to Elder Patel's too, and I'm going to call him out. I feel like we did some really cool stuff. There's 2 stories about Elder Patel that I want to talk about. One, I'm shocked he didn't remember, and one of them I would be shocked if he did. So, but Elder Patel is one of my favorite people. He's just such a cool guy, because I feel like, and he kind of talked about it too, like our personalities are somewhat different, but I feel like our underlying like strategy, way of doing things was very, very similar. But there's a special place in my heart for that guy. So I hope he watches this. But so Elder Patel, he served in Inverness for a little while. And when he came back to Aberdeen, he told me, you get the new companions, kind of give him the rundown of the area and stuff. And I was telling him, like, I feel like there's something in Elgin. I want to work in Elgin, because we covered Elgin, Buchan, and the Bridge of Dawn ward. And I was like, Bridge of Dawn's got enough. We need to kind of spread this out. And he came back with, and this is going to sound more harsh than I want it to be, but basically he's like, I don't care what you want to do. I will support you in what you got to do. But there's a person in Inverness that I'm going to baptize in these 6 weeks. He's like, that's why I'm here. That's all I care about right now. And again, that's too harsh. He was awesome. He cared about everything else, very supportive. But he's like, I don't know how, I don't know when, but that's going to happen. So I'm going to table that for a second, because I want to take it away from like super awesome spiritual Elder Patel to go to like hilarious, funny Elder Patel. So when Drew Allen was on, did he talk about the pheasant that he hit and cooked? The roadkill grill?
Yes, he did.
So that happened right before Elder Patel and I were together. And you can't do something like that and not have it spread like wildfire, right? So we were driving through Elgin, and it was kind of the outskirts of Elgin. It wasn't Elgin proper. But, they had those like shoulder high, mid chest high stone walls for the sheep.
Yep.
And then there was kind of the gaps for the fences in them. Well, we were driving on one of those country roads at 60 miles an hour or whatever, and it was raining and it's cold because it's Elgin in the winter, and there's a guy riding a bike towards us, and all of this happened in just a matter of seconds. But right as we're getting to one of those gaps in the wall, a little pigeon walks out, and this guy on the bike is getting really close to us, and we just nail this pigeon. I felt so bad for the guy on the bike, because I was driving, and I look back, and there's the feathers, and this guy on the bike just goes straight into it, and I was like, oh man, you just got feathered with this, and you're freezing, like it's bad. And so I look over to Patel, and I was like, hey Joe, should we go back and help? And he had already had out the phone, and he called Elder Allen. He's like, and this is what we said. I actually wrote it down because it made me laugh so hard, but he just said, Drew, how are things going? He's good. Do you have lunch plans? Because if not, we just hit a pigeon we'd love to bring you for lunch. I don't remember if I had to pull over, but I was laughing so hard that just in that moment, that's where his mind went.
That is pretty funny.
So,
goodness.
He was such a funny guy. So there was I want to say it was like the 4th or 5th week. It was the very end of moves, and he still had this nagging feeling about this lady that he had worked with in Inverness. And this lady she was an eternal investigator. She'd been going to church for years. She was basically a member of the ward, but she for some reason, I think she had an abusive boyfriend or something, but there was some reason she wouldn't get baptized. And we got a call from, I want to say it was Ryan Blake called, and I'm pretty sure it was him. And he just called because it was Saturday. He's like, hey, we had a goal this week. President Frederick feels very strongly for our baptismal goal that there's someone out there that needs to get baptized. We had someone drop out. We got to hit this goal. What do you have? And And I'm just like, I don't know. And as soon as Ryan called, Patel runs into the bedroom, starts packing his baptismal clothes, getting all this stuff ready to go. He's like, it's time. We're doing this today. And so I look at him and was like, I tell Blake, it's like, we'll see what we can do, and just hang up the phone. And it's like 6:40 in the morning, like just woke up, and we run down to the car and we drive to Inverness as fast as we can. And we're planning the whole way there because we'd kind of gone on exchanges a lot for this purpose of that he could work with this individual and I would kind of be there in case things happen. But it's just basically we came up with a plan of I'll get Van Leuven, who was there at the time, and he would take Salitos, who I think was still there, and they would go teach Allison, and they would get everything figured out. We would go talk to the bishop. We would tell the ward. We would fill the font, and we would baptize her at like 5. Like we set the time, and we were telling everybody, and it was just like crazy. It's like I can't believe we did this, but so we go tell the bishop, and then Van Leuven and I we basically just hang out at the church all day waiting for this. And sure enough, she shows up at like 3:00, ready to go. I specifically hadn't taught her so I could interview her because Justin had taught her and Joe had taught her. And so if I didn't teach her, I could still interview her without having to get like APs or presidents or somebody. And so I interview her. Of course, everything's great. And I would say this baptism was, without being too irreverent, was more like a party than it was a baptism. Because like the whole ward was there. People were bringing like cakes and like food, and like they were so excited that she was getting baptized. And she did. She got baptized. She got confirmed the next day. Everything was great. And the ward was so excited. One guy even came up to us like, hey, when's your next P day? I used to take people to the Isle of Skye. Like, we're going to the Isle of Skye next P day. Like, we need to hang out more kind of thing. And right after that, Elder Patel, true to his word, he was only there 6 weeks and he was gone. He got moved like a week after that.
Wow. So, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy. I can't believe he had the foresight to do that. But yeah, we also went out. That's when Bert Little passed away. So we were able to go to his funeral too. So I ran into Peacock there. That's when I really met Peacock because he came out for that. But yeah, Elder Patel, he was on a different level. He was crazy. Now he's Bishop Patel, I guess. So I'll have to give him a hard time for that. But
that's right.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy. So, but he didn't tell you any of that stuff. So
well, I'm sure he'll appreciate that you shared it, Steve. I'm sure.
I hope he remembers it. That was crazy. All right, so now we're getting to the end. So yeah, Elder Patel left. Then Elder Rose came in, Kevin Rose. I think he's been mentioned a few times on this. Mm-hmm. So Elder Rose, we used to fight over the car keys because we both hated the phone. And there was one time we were driving up Union Street to go to district meetings, and I remember he got pulled over, and I remember thinking, I'm glad I did not drive today because that would have been me. American license, and they didn't know what to do with it, and they let him off with the warnings. That works. So I missed a story in Liff. Do you care if I go back to Liff really quick?
Nope. No, I don't care at all.
Yeah. So this is another one of my hammer time stories. So, sorry I missed this, but I was with Elder Hawkins at this point, and our area was just totally dead at this point. And I felt bad because we were training, and the president's always, if you're going to train, you're going to baptize, that moves. You got to start them off right. And our area was so dead. And I got a call once. It was Bockham and Fissler. And they called and said, hey, we want to talk to you. Drop your companion with somebody else. We're going to pick you up. Just figure it out kind of thing. And I was like, oh, great. Here it comes. So I take Dave Larson and Brian Tusher were in our district at that time. They pick up Joe, and I get in the back of the zone leader's car, and they take me to their apartment. And I'm just getting ready to like be laid into. And those two, it was the complete opposite of that. So they sat me down and like, hey, you got a rough go of it right now. What's going on? How do we help you? And I think it was Bockham who first like, you haven't baptized in, 4.5, 6 months, something like that. It's been a while. It had been. It was the longest route of my mission. And Fissler's like, hey, I know where you're at. I want to say you went like 7.5 months or something like that without seeing a baptism. And Fissler at this time, he was like one of the top missionaries in my mind. He was so awesome. And Bockham was too. So no discredit to him. But Fissler, he really came down and just like, hey, I get it. I know where you're at. Because I feel like the mission is part of Hammer Time. It was, if you're not baptizing, you're not working hard. And I feel like he kind of helped dispel that rumor. And I will say to a certain point, like, obviously, if you're not following the rules and stuff, you can't expect the blessing. That's part of it too. But I feel like there was an aspect of Hammer Time that didn't appreciate you can go through the refiner's fire, and it might take more time for some than others. Because I don't feel like at the end of your mission, it doesn't matter how many people you baptize, right? It matters, how deep was your conversion? How much did you care? How much did you try?
Right.
And if you don't get any baptisms, it doesn't matter. That's not the end goal. That's a great perk. It's nice. You can point to that as a metric of success, but that's not the end goal in my mind. And in hindsight, I see that a lot more. And through this drought of my mission, for lack of better words, I feel like Fissler and Bockham, they could have gone like Glasgow, Hammer Time, because Fissler just came from Glasgow for a long time. So he had that mentality in him, I'm sure, but he definitely didn't wield it. He went complete 180, and I'll remember that. It definitely made me a better person. And later when I became a zone leader, it really kind of molded my approach, I feel like. And I definitely wasn't perfect at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if he realizes the impact he had in my life, especially my mission, but even after the fact. So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
a lot of people come down on Hammer Time. There was a lot of bad stuff, but I feel like there was so much good that was kind of buried in that grit of Hammer Time.
Right.
So,
Agreed.
yeah, Bockham and Fissler were awesome. So, back to Elder Row. So, we were still working in Elgin. We were still working in Buchan. We were doing what we could. Did you know Bill Slater? Because you were in Peterhead, right?
Yeah, I know Bill Slater. Mm-hmm.
All right. So Bill was one of my favorite people. We used to go hang out with Bill on a weekly basis. We had a once a week appointment where Bill would clear out like his whole afternoon. It was just, we're going to go hang out with Bill. And I thought that was, we're going to set up appointments and Bill will be our joint teach. Bill thought, we're going to go teach my friends in their house. And Bill, in typical Scottish fashion, he would just go after people. He was the only member I ever had tell me I was not bold enough as a missionary and that we need to just go. Because we were talking to this lady that lived down the street from him, he'd known for years. And we were talking to her, kind of, filling out what she knew and stuff. And he's like, Elder, come on. And just like, you need to be baptized. We'd been talking to this lady for like 2 minutes. And she's like, you elders are too weak. You got to figure this out. And just like called her to repentance on the street. I was like, well, all right. Needless to say, she did not accept that invitation, but I loved Bill Slater. He was great. And I was emailing Bill when I got home. I feel it kills me to say this, but he actually went less active shortly thereafter.
Wow.
And stuff. I feel terrible that it happened, but he was such a great guy. And I tried to call Ben Banks to confirm this, but Bill joined the church about the time Ben was there. And Bill told the story to me that he was baptized, and like a month later, he was made the branch president. And like 6 weeks later, he got a call from church headquarters saying, hey, we want to host a fireside in your house. Would you be willing to host Ezra Taft Benson in your home as a fireside? He's like, oh, yeah, sure. That'd be great. And he hangs up the phone. He's like, I've heard that name. And he calls the stake president. He's like, hey, who's Ezra Taft Benson? He's like, he's the prophet. He's the president of the church. He's like, oh, he wants to come to my house for a fireside. And so he hosted, if the story I remember is correct, but he said the prophet, and at that timeline, it would have been that. Which I want to say, and this is why I wanted to call Ben, because Ben was called to be a 70 at that time. And if President Benson was there, he could have had that conversation. So if I get a hold of Ben, I'll
confirm it. Confirm it and tell us. That'd be pretty cool. Bill never told us that little piece of information. That would have been interesting to know.
Yeah. I spent so much time with Bill. He was such a cool guy. So, the other thing that was fun with Elder Rose is somebody kept flashing our tires, so we had to move in with Elder Chase and Elder Bonin, which was really fun. So we got a new flat.
Jeez.
Yeah, because we lived on Summerfield Terrace that time. And that was an awful flat. Because you lived in Charlottesville when you were there, right? Because that's where Lovell lived.
That's where we stayed in. I think you stayed there too, didn't you, Zach?
Yeah, I was in Charlotte Street for the first 3 months. And then we moved to the flat that was just down the hill from the church, the Aberdeen church.
Oh,
It's
okay.
on Craigie Loaning, I think, is the name of the road.
Maybe that's a sister's flat.
But it could have been turned into a sister's flat after us, but we were the ones that moved into there because we moved the other Aberdeen elders out of they had like one of the high flats that they were in, and it was minging to say the least. It was bad. But yeah, I know exactly where you're at.
Yeah. So the guy in Inverness, he made good on his promise. He took me, Elder Rose, I want to say it was Elder Burnett, and his companion to Isle of Skye and Dunvegan, which that was a long haul for a P-Day to go from Aberdeen to Dunvegan. That was a fun experience. It was like a 300-mile drive, I think. But yeah. So yeah, then last companion. So at this point, I've been in 4 zones. I've checked all my boxes. I did not want to go to Glasgow. I wanted to stay in Aberdeen as long as I could. And President came up to me and Rose, and he was kind of asking us, how we saw the zone, kind of filling things out. And I told him, I remember, it's like, we need to put a companionship in Elgin. There's really good things happening in Elgin. Because we were teaching tons of people in Elgin. Everything was great. But we were driving so far. And he's like, oh, yeah, that'd be a good idea. We'll think about it. And so I thought he was going to drop me in Elgin for my last 6 weeks. And so he called, and I was like, sweet, going to Elgin, do whatever it takes. I don't care. He sends me to Glasgow to be with Tyler Monteith. And I was not excited. And I was really excited to go with Elder Monteith, but I was not excited to go to Glasgow. So, and I wrote this down from President's call, because he said, Elder Monteith is one of the best missionaries we have. He is a good zone leader. Make him a great one. And I don't know if I made good on that promise, because I think Elder Monteith was awesome from the start. But I know that President thought very highly of Elder Monteith. So
that's cool.
And after serving with him, I did too. So yeah, Zach Lovell and I, we get on a train and we head down to Glasgow, which was a lot of fun. One of my first days there, Tyler's telling me about Glasgow and all this stuff. And we were on the west side of Glasgow, kind of by Clydebank area.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, Glasgow's crazy. You don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know why. We ate Subway all the time. I don't know why. We could have found better things to eat. But I remember we're sitting in the car eating Subway. And right as he's telling me, like, crazy stuff happens all the time, this like huge Ned fight happens right in front of us. We had 2 high flats in front of us, and like 2 groups come down, one from each, and just like fight in the street for like 10 minutes. And we're just sitting there like watching it, eating Subway. I don't know. But and then they just like do their stuff, beat each other up. They're like, oh, okay. And then we just go into one of the high flats, beat somebody like normal people do. So that was crazy.
Oh man.
Another fun Glasgow high flat experience we had. And this is one if my mom tries to watch this, I'm sorry. I never told you this for a reason. We got a media referral, and I can't remember if it was like Maryhill or Easter House, but it was one of those rough areas. It wasn't in our area, but we were going that way, and we had a car. It was quick enough. And media referrals are like super sketchy, so we're like, we'll go give it a shot. And so we go to this high flat, and we're getting the lift, and the doors are about to close. And right as the door is closing, this hand just reaches around and grabs the door like this. And the thumb was like barely hanging on by a sliver of flesh, and just blood everywhere. It was disgusting. And the door just like gets winched open. And this guy, who was just bone white, just looks at us. He's covered in blood and says, "You two should leave now." We're like, "Sure, you don't have to tell us twice." And we walk out to the lobby. The door's closed, and he starts going up, and this gang of Neds with knives and cleavers just runs in after this guy. And just insane situation. And of course, one of them just standing there like, "I'll watch the numbers, you guys run up the stairs." And he just calls them, and they just watch. And I don't know what happened to that guy, if he got away or not, but it was just insane. Oh. And so, of course, we just booked it out of there. And there was like a trail of blood. It was awful. I don't know if Monteith remembers this either or not, but I don't remember if we passed that referral on or not, or just left it at that. But I was like, we're not going back there for a while.
As a daytime referral, make sure you go back during the daytime.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Wow.
Another fun thing with Monteith, I remember one day, because he played lacrosse. He played BYU lacrosse. He was really good. I convinced him that he could not throw an orange with his lacrosse stick over the street, over the field, into the Clyde from our apartment. And I don't think he did. I measured it from this. It was like 700 feet. So he didn't really stand a chance. But yeah, there was a night that we decided to throw fruit out of our third-story window with a lacrosse stick into an empty field. So that was fun. But yeah, I mean, Elder Monteith was great. And one thing that he told me, I wish I'd served with him earlier, because we had crossed paths, because he was trained by Elder Bear when I was in Edinburgh. And I remember the first time I saw him, he was sitting across the room, and there was, 100 missionaries in this room, right? Well, not that many, but it was like the whole district of, there's like 12 missionaries there. And he was new, and it was kind of weird and stuff, and it was really hush hush. And I remember he said from that impression of me, he thought I was really unapproachable, and that for some reason I just didn't like him. I had a grudge against him, and I remember feeling so bad about that, and that changed my life. That I've always tried to be better and more approachable than that. So I'm sure he does not remember that, but it definitely impacted my life. So my last 6 weeks with Elder Monteith in Glasgow, that was my big takeaway. So the other thing was fun is I had to drive because he didn't have his license, and I definitely took a wrong turn once and ended up in Oban, and that was definitely by accident. But
Of course it was.
yeah, so my family we have Scottish heritage, and my family comes from Kilsyth, which is on the northwest side of Cumbernauld. And so I remember the one thing I wanted to do was go see that part of Scotland before I went home. But I knew I'd have to go to the Glasgow zone. And so I've kind of made the promise to myself, that's okay. I don't want to go. I don't need to see it. Glasgow scares me. I'm fine staying in Aberdeen. And I feel like part of the 6 weeks was so I could go see where my family came from. And so that was fun that we were able to go, because we ultimately found someone up there and we had to go see him. And it was really cool to have that tender mercy that I could go see where my heritage came from Scotland. So
yeah, that is really cool. I love it.
That was it. So, well, I guess President Frederick stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've given us quite a journey of your experiences, Steve. Talk to us about your memories of President and Sister Frederick. I guess you had them the whole of your mission, right?
I did. So I'm unique because I'm the first one from my group. I left the same day as President Frederick.
Okay. Wow.
So I kind of got to see some stuff. And then because I served in the mission home there for a little while, I got to have kind of a unique relationship with him, which was really awesome. That I feel like a lot of missionaries would have loved to have that experience, but very few actually got to. So I felt very happy because I've emailed him a few times. I've talked to him since, and it's fun to reminisce with him. But, so I'd like to single out Sister Frederick first, because I feel like they kind of get lumped together, and I think President gets a lot of the credit. And with being in the mission home, I'd like to say that Sister Frederick was amazing. So one thing that she did is she handled all of the packages, all the mail on the stuff. Whenever a zone conference came up and you got your package and you knew it was there, there was rarely a time one got missed. That was all Sister Frederick and Sister Myers. They were both fantastic. They cared so much about that because they knew missionaries depended on that, and it meant so much to them to know that you could count on their package. They took that extremely seriously. And then the other thing I noticed that a lot of people didn't understand is she was very in tune with kind of the physical needs of the missionaries, and that if someone was sick or something, she knew, and she would be able to reach out and kind of, the Sprite saying she had and things like that. She was on top of that stuff a lot more than people realized. So, because there was a lot of people that kind of filtered in and out of the mission home that were pretty sick, and a lot of people that was kept really hush hush. A lot of that health stuff was very quiet. It was only known to zone leaders and people that had to know. And so a lot of that's just kind of happened in the background. A lot of that was Sister Frederick. And so
wow,
that was really cool to see her kind of, thankless contributions to the mission that kind of get missed. So I want to make sure she gets the credit she deserves.
For sure.
So President Frederick then. So one thing I really liked about him was his leadership style. And I think as a zone leader, it was interesting to see, because at zone conference, you'd always have your individual conversations with President Frederick, right? But when you were a zone leader, you kind of lost that. He'd always just come up to you, grab you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you worthy?" Then he'd say, "Cool, let's go talk with your companion." And he would take feedback and he would take direction from his zone leaders and his district leaders, and he would apply that to the mission strategy. And so, like, when I told him my feelings about Elgin, he opened Elgin like a couple months later. And I think Elder Monteith was the one that went there, because I told Elder Monteith all about Elgin. I was so excited about Elgin. And then he was the one that opened it. And so that was fun that he kind of got to carry that torch for me.
That's cool.
Another thing is, and Zach will remember this, I'm specifically not going to name these two because I don't want them to be tied to this as a reputation. But when I was in Aberdeen, there was 2 missionaries that crashed a car. And the way I remember it was they kind of went on unjustified exchanges and basically went joyriding and put a car in a ditch. No one was hurt, but the car was totaled. And so I remember calling President and saying, hey, this happened. You know, how do you want to handle it? He's like, I don't know. It's your zone. You figure it out. And that was just kind of his approach of, you know, I put you in charge for a reason. I'm not going to hold your hand and babysit you. Good luck. Like, if it was major, something like that, if somebody was hurt, he'd come down, but he's like, you know, you got to learn to fly on your own kind of thing.
Wow.
And I love that he had so much trust in his missionaries, because there was a meeting that I think it was with President Payne, and President Payne was there with President Frederick, me, Rose, and Bill Slater were there. And President Payne was kind of, you know, razzing President Frederick about, like, you know, your missionaries are kind of flying off the handle. They're a little fast and loose, you know, better tighten your ship a little bit. And President just looked at him straight in the eyes and said, I trust my missionaries like you trust your bishops. Like, I got my stuff, you handle yours. Let's work together. But, you know, like, I'm not going to take that kind of criticism, unconstructive criticism, lightly, basically, and kind of put him in his place. But it was very firm, very loving, but it just like solidified, like, President has my back 100%, good, bad, or otherwise. So, and I can abuse that trust and lose it, but, you know, he's always going to be there. And I feel like that extended across the board. It was just really cool to see. And I think back to Elder Holland, when Elder Holland came to the mission, he really verbalized it, because he said one quote he had was, this is a very, very good mission. And he said that directly to President Frederick. And there was rumors of, like, the Bristol mission. And there's a guy in our stake that I'm good friends with. His dad was the president of the Manchester mission when Elder Holland was the area president. And Elder Holland came and just basically drugged this guy through the ringer and said, your mission needs to shape up, like, figure things out. So Elder Holland does not just say that lightly. And so for him to come and say, you know, high praises to your mission was a big deal. And then to kind of illustrate that point, when Elder Holland came, he gave the synopsis of President Hinckley had passed a few months before, and talked about how President Hinckley was a workhorse. He was working till the end. He was always there. You could depend on him. And then he immediately went to the Fredericks and said, you are the same. And basically, you're cut from the same mold. And I just thought that's a life goal that I'll never achieve, to be held in that same regard. So,
That's
but
awesome.
yeah, I mean, such a cool guy.
Yeah, I can second that. I mean, you probably saw the other side of President Frederick, where I was his zone leader his first 6 months of his mission service, and he was like a deer in the headlights at that point. But he was, you know, having talked to him since then, he was just kind of absorbing everything and trying to figure out, okay, who are my trustworthy people? Who are my go-tos? How can I make this function and work in a long-term effort? And he definitely did that, and did it in his own way. And he does have a powerful testimony. I can assure you of that as well.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. Well, Steve,
sorry, I got 2 more real quick ones.
Yeah, carry on.
So because he went home the same day I did, I got to hike Pratt's Hill with him. And so I was there when he dedicated his mission. It was rare because Sister Frederick went with him. And so it was, because I remember sitting there looking out over Edinburgh thinking, this is it. And then President Frederick was just crying off to the side. And it was just really cool to see him knowing that he gave his all. So, and then as part of that, and I think part of the reason it meant so much to him, and it really didn't dawn on me until he did this, but at our last supper there, where we're in the mission home, we're all eating, he grabbed Sister Frederick kind of around the shoulder and said, I want you to know that Sister Frederick is now married to a returned missionary because he'd always trained his sons that, you got to go on a mission, and they all did. And several of his daughters did too, but it meant so much to him that he could have that title. Because, he'd done all these other callings, he'd been great in all these other capacities, but that was the one box he hadn't checked.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
That was cool. It was really cool. So.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, you've taken us down memory lane in a big way tonight, and I really appreciate you making time and doing the preparation that you have to, recollect the names you have. It's been a lot of fun. I know that you've touched on a few people that we need to still get on the podcast. Is there anyone that you want to call out a second time if needs be, or any others that you'd like to see on the podcast in the future as we work on them? Yeah,
so I got some names of people that have been called out less that I'd love to hear from. So Andrew Merrick, he was a convert. He was an awesome guy. Josh Bowling, Brandon Buckley, Dave Harrison, Dave Larson, Chase Crockett, who might be in the S.E.M mission by this point. I think it was January, so he'd probably be on the other side. I would love to hear from Elder and Sister Myers. Jesse James Smith, because Jesse James and I went to college together, so I'd love to hear what happened. I think he went to Raytheon, but and then Spencer Chatlin, because he went just down to Dumfries for a while and just completely set it on fire. He was awesome. And then I have another one I think it would be really hard to do, but I would love, and I think if anyone could do it, this community could come together and do it because this is such an awesome group. But I would love if we could do a tribute to Todd Yates, because Todd passed a couple years after we came home. And I think it would mean a lot to his family. And the stories are here. We just have to figure out how to do it. But I think we'd owe that to him if we could make it happen.
So. That would be a pretty cool one, too, because you could ultimately have all of his companions on a call and have each of them just go through their time with him. That'd be a pretty amazing
cool
thing to do. My gosh.
Yeah, I think we kind of owe it to him. I don't know how to do it. And then two others that are interesting, but they think they're outside the scope of your project. I would love to hear from Ben Banks. He's got such a cool story, and I would love to hear a wives of Scottish missionaries too. So I'll have my wife come on and
wives
talk about her experience being married to someone that went to Scotland. But
oh my gosh,
that would be a whole nother podcast.
Down the rabbit hole with the ladies that deal with us.
Yes, we probably don't want to hear that, actually.
Hopefully they're kind about it, but they might have a no holds barred situation.
Other beverage.
Oh my gosh, he's got Iron Brew in hand. Amazing.
He does indeed.
It's good stuff. They have it in Sandy.
Serious?
We go to Pirate O's in Sandy.
Pirate O's. I've driven by that place too many times to tell that I've never been in there. That's pretty funny. Well, good. Well, Steve, thank you again for taking time. On behalf of Jack, Bryce, and myself, and all the other missionaries that are listening, we just want to express how much we love you as our brother in Scotland. We're so grateful that you gave your time, your efforts, and your energy to serve the people that we love so much. So thank you for coming and sharing your stories. And Zach, Lovell, we're so glad that you were able to come on and spend some time with us and help Steve with a couple memories. That was very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we will say cheerio to you for now, and we'll talk more soon. All right.
Sounds good. Have a good night.
Cheerio then.
Good night.
Bye.